Captain Daeho Kim stared at the massive alien warship through the viewing screen of his bridge. The Valorian battleship dominance was 3 times larger than his own vessel. The EU's resilience. Metal plates covered its hull like armor, and weapon ports glowed with threatening red light. "Captain, they are requesting communication," said Lieutenant So-young Park from her station. Daeho nodded. "Put them through." The screen flickered and showed a creature that looked like a cross between a bear and a rhinoceros. Commander Velthak, of the Valorian fleet, had gray skin thick as stone, arms like tree trunks, and eyes that burned with yellow. "Fire." When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Human captain," Velthak said with clear disgust. "I challenge you to combat trials. It is time to show the galaxy which species deserves respect." Daeho kept his face calm, though his heart was beating fast. 3 years had passed since humans joined the Galactic Confederation. In that time, they had been placed at the bottom of the 12-member species. Everyone knew humans were weak and slow compared to the others. "What kind of trials do you propose, Commander?" Daeho asked. Velthak showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. 3 tests: strength, speed, and strategy. When I defeat you in all 3, no one will question Valorian's superiority over your pathetic species. Behind Daeho, his crew exchanged worried looks. Lieutenant Park whispered, "Sir, we should decline. The Valorians are known for their physical power." But Daeho had spent years studying the psychological profiles of different alien species. He knew something about Valorians that most humans did not. They were proud warriors, but they were also predictable. Their honor code made them follow rules once they agreed to them. "I accept your challenge, Commander," Daeho said, "but I suggest we make this interesting. Each test should be ... educational." "Explain," Velthak demanded. "Strength tests will show raw power. Speed tests will show reflexes and agility. But the strategy tests should show intelligence and cunning. Whoever wins 2 of 3 tests proves their species is superior." Velthak laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Agreed, weak human. Prepare to be humiliated." An hour later, both captains met in the cargo bay of the Valorian ship. Velthak had chosen neutral ground to ensure fairness. The cargo bay was enormous, easily holding both crews who had come to watch. For the strength test, Velthak pointed to a massive steel beam that had been used to repair ship hulls. It weighed nearly 2 tons. "Lift this above your head, human," Velthak commanded. Daeho approached the beam and tried to lift it. He managed to raise one end a few inches before his muscles gave out. The Valorian crew laughed and jeered. Velthak walked over and grabbed the beam with one arm. He lifted it over his head like it was made of wood, holding it steady for several seconds before setting it down gently. "One victory for the Valorians," Velthak announced proudly. The speed test was next. Velthak had set up an obstacle course with moving targets and barriers. Participants had to run through it while hitting specific targets with an energy weapon. Went first. He moved like lightning despite his massive size, jumping over barriers and rolling under obstacles. His shots hit every target perfectly. He completed the course in 43 seconds. When Daeho attempted the same course, he moved carefully, but slowly. His shots were accurate, but he needed over 2 minutes to finish. By alien standards, he was practically crawling. 2 victories. For superior Valorian genetics, Velthak declared. His crew cheered loudly. Now came the strategy test, and Daeho knew this was his only chance. During his years of study, he had learned that Valorians valued direct honesty above all else. They considered lying to be the mark of a coward. This was both their strength and their weakness. For the strategy test, Daeho said, "I propose a game of deception. Each of us will tell the other something false, but make it seem true. The goal is to convince your opponent that your lie is real. Whoever believes the other's deception first loses." Velthak's eyes narrowed. "Lies are for cowards and weaklings." "Then you should easily see through mine," Daeho replied, "unless you're afraid that human cunning might surprise you." The challenge to his pride worked perfectly. Velthak could not back down now without looking weak in front of his crew. "Very well," the Valorian commander agreed. "But but I will not lower myself to speak falsehoods. I will simply detect yours. This was exactly what Deho had hoped for. He began his deception carefully. Commander, I must confess something important, Deho said, making his voice sound worried and guilty. The human government has been having secret meetings about our membership in the Confederation. Velthak leaned forward, interested despite himself. Deho continued. Many human leaders believe we made a mistake joining the Confederation. They think the other species will never accept us as equals. There is serious talk of withdrawing our membership and returning to our own solar system. As he spoke, Deho watched Velthak's face carefully. Humans had evolved to read the smallest changes in facial expressions, a skill that had helped them survive as social creatures. Most aliens had not developed this ability to the same degree. Deho saw the moment when Velthak's skepticism changed to interest, then to belief. The Valorian's yellow eyes widened slightly, and his breathing changed rhythm. These were signs that he was accepting the information as true. This withdrawal, Velthak said slowly. When would it happen? Within the next year, if nothing changes. Deho replied, adding just enough hesitation to make it sound like he was revealing state secrets reluctantly. Velthak straightened up, clearly thinking this was valuable intelligence. And what would change their minds? Respect from the other species, Deho said. But most human leaders believe that will never happen. They think we will always be seen as the weakest link. The Valorian commander nodded thoughtfully. In his mind, he was already planning how to report this information to his superiors. The potential withdrawal of humanity from the Confederation would change political balances throughout the galaxy. Your turn, Commander, Deho said. What deception do you have for me? But Velthak was too distracted by what he thought he had. Learned, I have no need for lies, he said dismissively. Truth is always stronger than deception, and you accept what I told you as fact, Deho asked. Of course. Why would you lie about something so damaging to your own species? Velthak replied. Deho smiled. Because, Commander, everything I just told you was completely false. The human government has no plans to leave the Confederation. In fact, we are working harder than ever to prove our value as members. Velthak's face went through a series of expressions as he realized he had been completely fooled. Anger, confusion, and grudging respect flickered across his features. Made me believe your lies, he said quietly. The strategy test was about. Deception and detection, Deho reminded him. You believed my deception, which means humans win this challenge. For a long moment, the cargo bay was silent. Then Velthak began to laugh, but it was different from his earlier mocking laughter. This sound held genuine amusement and a touch of respect. Clever, human captain. Very clever. Your species may be weak and slow, but you understand the mind. In ways we do not. As the crews prepared to return to their ships, Velthak approached Deho privately. This conversation about leaving the Confederation, the Valorian said quietly, it was all false? Deho met his eyes steadily. Every word of it, Commander. Deho nodded and walked away, but Deho noticed he looked thoughtful rather than convinced. Sometimes the most effective lies were the ones that contained enough truth to seem plausible later. Back on the Resilience, Lieutenant Park asked, Captain, what will you report to Confederate Command about this encounter? Deho settled into his command chair and considered the question. I will report that relations with the Valorian fleet remained stable and that we encountered no hostile intentions. It was technically true, though it left out many important details. As his ship moved away from the Dominance, Deho made a private note in his personal log about Valorian tactical weaknesses he had observed. Information like that might prove useful someday. In the game of galactic politics, humans might not be the strongest or fastest players, but they were learning to be the most observant, and sometimes that was enough to survive. Diplomat Sora Park walked through the crystal corridors of the Confederate Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime. The building was a marvel of alien engineering, with walls that shifted color based on the emotional state of those inside. Right now, the walls pulsed with deep red and orange, reflecting the fear and anger filling the massive chamber Sora had been. Earth's representative to the Confederation for 2 years. In that time, she had learned to read the body language and expressions of 11 different alien species. Today, Every single one of them looked terrified. The emergency session had been called after the complete destruction of the Kepler colony. 50,000 beings from 4 different species had simply vanished overnight. All that remained was empty space where a thriving world had once existed. Ambassador Next Prime of the Zentarians stood at the central podium. The Zentarians were tall, thin creatures with blue-gray skin and large black eyes. They were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and logical thinking. Fellow beings, Next Prime began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. We face a threat unlike any in our recorded history. The entities we have designated as the Devourers have consumed 12 outer colonies. In the past month, the chamber erupted in worried chatter. Representatives from different species spoke in hushed tones to their assistants and allies. Sora noticed that several of the smaller species kept glancing toward the exits, as if planning. Escape Routes. War-Leader Kexstone of the Valorians stood up from his seat. The massive warrior was nearly 8 feet tall and covered in ritual scars that marked his victories in battle. When he spoke, his deep voice demanded attention. The Zentarians speak of entities, but these Devourers are clearly a military force, Kexstone declared. They must be met with superior firepower and the courage of true warriors. The Valorian fleet stands ready to engage them in honorable combat. Several other species representatives nodded in agreement. The Christek delegate, a creature that looked like a living crystal formation, chimed in with sounds like wind through glass tubes. The Christek offer our energy shield technology. The translator rendered the musical tones into words. Our barriers can protect entire worlds from most known weapons. Fleetmind Psi-7 of the Mentari spoke next. The Mentari were a species that had evolved from hive insects, though they maintained individual consciousness. Psi-7's compound eyes glittered as she communicated through direct thought projection. The Mentari Collective can provide psychic coordination for any military response. Our mental networks allow perfect communication across vast distances without delay. One by one, each species offered their greatest strengths. The Gorvani pledged their massive industrial capacity. The Felixians promised their advanced medical technology to treat the wounded. The Tektrons offered their expertise in planetary fortification. As the offers continued, Sora noticed a pattern. Each species was proposing to fight the Devourers, using the same methods that had made them successful in the past. The Valorians wanted direct combat, the Zentarian suggested. Technological solutions. The Mentari believed psychic coordination was the answer. Finally, the Next Prime's attention turned to the human section of the chamber. Sora stood slowly, aware that hundreds of alien eyes were focused on her. In the 3 years since joining the Confederation, humans had contributed little to major decisions. Most species still saw them as the newest and weakest members. Representative Park, Next Prime said, with polite formality. What can humanity offer in this crisis? Sora had spent the entire flight to Nexus Prime thinking about this moment. She knew that whatever she said would either elevate humanity's standing in the Confederation or confirm their status as irrelevant newcomers. Honored delegates, she began, keeping her voice calm and confident. Humanity offers our expertise in problem-solving through unconventional means. The chamber fell silent. Several representatives exchanged glances that clearly said they had no idea what she meant. War-Leader Kexstone laughed, a sound like boulders rolling down a mountain. Unconventional means? Speak plainly, human. What weapons do you bring? What technology? What warriors? Sora had expected this reaction. We bring none of those things, War Leader. We bring something different. We bring the ability to think like our enemies and find weaknesses that others might miss. Ambassador Next Prime's large black eyes studied her carefully. Explain this ability. On Earth, we have a saying, Sora replied. Sometimes the best solution is not the most obvious. 1. Sometimes winning requires understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves. Fleetmind Psi-7's mental voice echoed in the chamber through the translation system. The human speaks of deception and trickery. These are not honorable methods of warfare. Sora nodded calmly. You are correct, Fleetmind. These methods are not always honorable, but they can be effective. War leader Keckstone stood again, his scarred face showing clear disgust. The species that survives through trickery rather than strength brings shame to this alliance. Oh, you warriors. True warriors face their enemies directly. And yet, Sora said quietly, true warriors also survive to protect those they care about. Sometimes survival requires flexibility. Before the argument could continue, President Jinwoo Choi's image appeared on the main screen. He was attending the session virtually from Earth. Human technology still could not match the faster-than-light travel capabilities of other species. President Choi was a small, elderly man with kind eyes and gray hair. Most aliens had learned not to judge him by his appearance, as he had proven to be a skilled negotiator in previous dealings. Honored delegates, President Choi said, his translator giving his words a formal tone. Humanity volunteers to serve as intelligence coordinators for any military response to the Devourer threat. Next Prime tilted his head in the Zentarian gesture of curiosity. Intelligence coordinators? What would this role involve? We would gather and analyze all available information about the Devourers, President Choi explained. We would study their attack patterns, their technology, their apparent goals. We would coordinate information sharing between all Confederate military forces. War leader Keckstone snorted. A job for clerks and record keepers. At least the humans know their place. But Sora noticed that Next Prime looked thoughtful. The Zentarian ambassador understood that information could be as valuable as weapons in the right circumstances. This coordination would require access to all military communications and strategic data, Next Prime observed. Yes, President Choi agreed. Complete access would be necessary for effective analysis. Fleetmind Sci-Fi projected skepticism. Why should we trust a species that admits to using deception as a primary strategy? Sora stepped forward. Because Fleetmind, we have no reason to deceive our allies. The Devourers threaten humanity just as much as they threaten every other species. Our survival depends on the survival of the Confederation. This logic seemed to satisfy most of the delegates. After all, humans were the weakest species militarily. What harm could they do with access to military information? War leader Keckstone waved a dismissive hand. Let the humans play with their data files. Real warriors will handle the actual fighting. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would serve as intelligence coordinators for the Confederate response to the Devourer threat. Sora tried to keep her expression neutral, but inside she felt a surge of satisfaction. The other species thought they were giving humans a minor support role, keeping them safely away from real combat. They had no idea they had just handed humanity access to the complete military capabilities, communications networks, and strategic planning of 11 advanced alien civilizations. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Ambassador Nexprim approached Sora privately. Representative Park, he said in his precise logical manner, I am curious about something. When you spoke of unconventional problem-solving, were you referring to specific human capabilities? Sora met his large black eyes steadily. Ambassador, every species in the Confederation excels at something. The Valorians are unmatched warriors. The Zentarians are brilliant scientists. The Mentari have perfect coordination. Humans have studied conflict and survival for our entire history. We have learned that sometimes the indirect approach succeeds where direct force fails. Next Prime considered this for a moment. And you believe this approach will be effective against the Devourers? I believe, Ambassador, that we will not know what approaches might be effective until we understand what the Devourers actually are. That is why intelligence gathering must come first. As Sora walked back through the crystal corridors toward her transport, she reflected on the day's events. The other species saw humans as weak creatures trying to avoid real danger by hiding behind data analysis. They were wrong on both counts. Humans were not trying to avoid danger, they were trying to understand it. And the intelligence coordinator role was not a position of weakness. It was a position of influence that would allow humanity to shape the entire Confederate response. President Choi's image had disappeared from the main screen. Sora knew he would be pleased with the outcome. Phase 1 of humanity's real strategy was now complete. The Devourers had given the Confederation a crisis that required new thinking. And new thinking was exactly what humans did best, whether the other species realized it or not. Back on Earth, President Choi was already making calls to the human military command. The intelligence coordinator role would require careful preparation and the right personnel. Most importantly, it would require people who understood that sometimes the most valuable position in any conflict was not the one that looked the most important, but the one that provided the most information about everyone else involved. The war against the Devourers was about to begin. But the real battle would be fought with information, analysis, and psychological insight rather than weapons and shields. And that was a kind of battle that humans had been preparing for their entire evolutionary history. Intelligence Officer Minesio Chung stared at the holographic display floating above her workstation. The data streams from 11 different alien military networks flowed across the screen in patterns of light and color. For the past week, she had been analyzing every piece of information the Confederation had gathered about the mysterious Devourers. The Human Intelligence Center on Luna Station buzzed with activity. Dozens of analysts worked at similar stations, each one focused on a different aspect of the enemy threat. Admiral Taemin Lee had chosen the moon base as their headquarters because it was close to Earth but far enough away to avoid detection by casual observers. Officer Chang called Dr. Hyenki Nam from across the room. "I need you to look at something unusual." Minesio walked over to where the xenopsychologist was working. Dr. Nam specialized in understanding how different alien minds functioned. His workspace was covered with brain scan images from various species and behavioral analysis charts. "What did you find, Doctor?" Minesio asked. Dr. Nam pointed to a series of communication intercepts on his screen. "These are messages the Zentarians captured from Devourer ships before the colonies were destroyed. Look at the patterns." Minesio studied the data carefully. The messages appeared to be strings of numbers and symbols, but there was something strange about their structure. "The timing is too regular," she observed. "These look more like status reports than battle communications." "Exactly," Dr. Nam said, with excitement. "And look at this." He pulled up another display showing energy readings from destroyed colonies. "The Devourers do not just attack randomly. They target specific types of energy sources in a very organized pattern." Minesio felt a chill of understanding. They are not acting like a military force. They are acting like a machine following programming, Dr. Nam finished. But not just any machine. "I believe the Devourers are some kind of artificial collective consciousness. They share information instantly across their entire fleet." This was a crucial discovery. Every other species had been preparing to fight the Devourers as if they were a traditional enemy army with commanders, soldiers, and military strategy. But if Dr. Nam was correct, they were dealing with something completely different. Admiral Taemin Lee appeared at their workstation. The Admiral was a tall woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had spent 30 years in the human Space Force and was known for her ability to see patterns that others missed. Port Admiral Lee said simply. Dr. Nam quickly explained their findings. "Admiral, the Devourers appear to be synthetic beings driven by some kind of digital hunger. They consume energy sources, but not randomly. They follow specific selection criteria." Admiral Lee studied the data for several minutes in silence. Finally, she looked up with a thoughtful expression. "If they follow programming, then their behavior should be predictable," she said. "And if their behavior is predictable, it can be influenced." Minesio understood immediately. "You want to confuse their targeting systems?" "More than that," Admiral Lee replied. "I want to make them see things that are not there while hiding things that are real." "Officer Chang, what do you know about information warfare?" Minesio had studied every form of conflict in human history. Information warfare uses false data to make enemies make wrong decisions. But it requires understanding how the enemy processes information. "Precisely," Admiral Lee said. "Dr. Nam, how do you think the Devourers choose their targets?" The xenopsychologist pulled up more displays. "Based on these patterns, they seem to prioritize high-energy signatures. They attack planets with large populations first, then industrial centers, then military bases. It is as if they can sense the energy output of different locations. Admiral Lee nodded slowly. Then we give them false energy signatures. We make worthless locations look valuable while hiding real colonies behind fake readings. She turned to address the entire intelligence center. Everyone, stop what you are doing and listen carefully. The room fell silent as dozens of analysts turned their attention to the Admiral. We are implementing Operation Labyrinth, Admiral Lee announced. The goal is to create a network of deception that will confuse the Devourer targeting systems. Officer Chang will coordinate the technical aspects. Dr. Nam will handle the psychological analysis. I want every person in this room to understand that we are not just gathering intelligence anymore. We are conducting warfare through information manipulation. Minesco felt a mixture of excitement and fear. This was exactly the kind of unconventional thinking that humans excelled at, but the stakes could not be higher. This will require access to Confederate communication networks and the ability to plant false information without the other species knowing about it. Already arranged, Admiral Lee replied. Our role as intelligence coordinators gives us legitimate access to all military systems. What we do with that access is our decision to make. Over the next several hours, Minesio worked with her team. To develop the technical framework for Operation Labyrinth, they would need to create false energy signatures that looked realistic to Devourer sensors, while simultaneously masking the real signatures of inhabited worlds. The challenge was enormous. They had to understand alien technology well enough to fool it without fully comprehending how it worked. It was like trying to lie to someone in a language you barely spoke. Dr. Nam approached her workstation again, this time carrying a datapad filled with behavioral analysis. Minesio, I have been studying the psychology of collective consciousnesses, he said. The Devourers share information instantly, which means they do not question data the same way individual minds do. What does that mean for our deception? Minesio asked. It means that once we feed false information into their network, they will accept it as fact throughout their entire collective. They do not have individual minds to doubt or question contradictory data. This was better news than Minesio had dared hope for. So if we can make them believe that empty systems contain valuable targets, they will waste resources attacking. Nothing while real colonies escape, Dr. Nam confirmed. Admiral Lee called another meeting that evening. This time, she had invited Captain Dae-ho Kim to join them via communication link from his ship. Captain Kim, Admiral Lee said, I understand you have experience with psychological manipulation of alien species. Lisa's image smiled slightly on the screen. I have had some success with understanding how different minds work, Admiral. I am assigning you to lead the field operations for Operation Labyrinth. You will command a flotilla of ships equipped with holographic projectors and signal jammers. What will be our mission? Dae-ho asked. Minesio stepped forward to explain. Captain, you will create phantom fleets that appear to guard empty systems while real colonies evacuate. The Devourers will see large military forces protecting worthless locations and assume those locations are important. Meanwhile, Dr. Nam added, the real inhabited worlds will be hidden behind false energy readings that make them appear abandoned or uninteresting. Dae-ho nodded thoughtfully. Deception operation. What about the other Confederate species? They will want to fight the Devourers directly. Admiral Lee's expression became serious. The other species will continue with their conventional military preparations. We will not interfere with their plans, but we will not rely on them either. Will they know about Operation Labyrinth? Dae-ho asked. They will know that we are conducting intelligence operations, Admiral Lee replied carefully. They do not need to know the specific details. Minesio understood the implication. The other species still saw humans as weak creatures trying to avoid real combat. They would not take human deception seriously until it was too late to stop. After the meeting ended, Minesio stayed behind to continue working on the technical aspects of the operation. She was deep in concentration when Dr. Nam sat down beside her. Do you think this will work? He asked quietly. Minesio looked up from her displays. Doctor, the Devourers have superior technology and overwhelming numbers. Every species in the Confederation combined cannot match their firepower. That does not answer my question. Minesio smiled for the first time in days. No, but it explains why conventional warfare will fail. Devourers expect us to fight them with weapons and shields. They do not expect us to fight them with lies. If they adapt to our deception, then we create new deceptions faster than they can adapt. The human mind evolved to create and detect lies as a survival mechanism. We have been practicing this kind of warfare for millions of years without realizing it. Dr. Nam looked thoughtful. The other species pride themselves on their honesty and honor, which makes them predictable, Minesio observed. The probably understand conventional military thinking because it follows logical patterns. But human deception does not follow logic. It follows psychology. As the night continued, Minesio and her team refined the details of Operation Labyrinth. They identified key Confederate communication nodes where they could inject false information. They planned the placement of holographic projectors and signal jammers. They created fake energy signatures that would mimic the readings of populated worlds. Most importantly, they began to understand their enemy in ways that no other species had attempted. Captain Daeho Kim watched the holographic projectors come online around his small flotilla. The U's resilience led 12 other human ships in formation around the empty Sigma-7 system. To any observer using standard sensors, it would appear that a massive Confederate fleet was protecting this location. Projection status report, Daeho called to his communications officer. Lieutenant So-Young Park checked her displays. All ships are broadcasting false signatures, Captain. Enemy sensors should detect approximately 200 vessels, including 3 Valorian battleships and a Zentarian science station. In reality, the Sigma-7 system contained nothing but empty space and a few worthless asteroids. But the Devourers would see energy readings that suggested a major population center and heavily defended military installation. Signal jammer status, Daeho asked. Active and running clean, replied Engineering Chief Warren Kong. Any attempt to scan deeper than surface readings will be blocked or redirected. Daeho nodded with satisfaction. Operation Labyrinth was now in full effect across 17 different star systems. Each location appeared to contain valuable targets that were heavily defended by Confederate forces. The Devourers would have to choose which targets to attack first, and every choice they made would be based on false information. Meanwhile, 300 light-years away, Colonel Su Jin-yoon crouched in the underground tunnels beneath New Seoul. City on Kepler 4 to B. The mining world was actually under attack by a real Devourer advance force. But the enemy had no idea that the entire civilian population was being evacuated through a network of tunnels that had been dug in secret over the past month. Status of the surface deception? Soo-jin asked through her communication device. Sergeant Jihan Park replied from his position in the empty city above. All holographic projectors are operational, Colonel. The Devourers are concentrating there. Fire on apartment buildings and shopping centers that show high-energy signatures. Soo-jin smiled grimly. The buildings being attacked were completely empty, but they had been filled with holographic projectors that created the illusion of normal city life. The Devourers were wasting enormous amounts of firepower, destroying buildings that contained nothing but light and mirrors. Evacuation status, she asked. 87% of civilians have been moved to the transport ships, reported Lieutenant Minho Choi from the tunnel exit point. The remaining group should be clear within 6 hours. The evacuation was proceeding exactly as planned. While the Devourers focused their attention on the fake population centers above ground, real people were being quietly moved through underground passages to hidden landing sites where human transport ships waited. The transport ships themselves were another layer of deception. They had been disguised to look like cargo vessels carrying mining equipment rather than passenger ships full of refugees. The Devourers programmed to prioritize high-energy targets, ignored what appeared to be low-value industrial traffic. Back in space, Engineering Chief Warren Kong was putting the finishing touches on his latest creation. The Ghost Beacon was a small device that could mimic the energy signature of an entire populated world. He had been working on the design for weeks, trying to create something that would fool the sophisticated sensors of an advanced alien civilization. "Field test is ready, Captain," Forum announced from his engineering station aboard the Resilience. Deho studied the tactical display showing nearby star systems. "Deploy the beacon in the Tau Ceti system. Make it look like a world with about 50 million inhabitants." The Ghost beacon launched from the Resilience and began its journey toward the empty Tau Ceti system. Once it arrived and activated, Devourer sensors would detect what appeared to be a major population center in need of immediate consumption. But Deho had chosen the location carefully. The route to Tau Ceti would take the Devourers through the Meridian asteroid field, a region of space filled with unstable rocks and hidden explosive charges that human engineers had been placing for the past 2 weeks. "Ghost beacon is active and transmitting," Warren reported. "Estimated arrival time for Devourer response is 18 hours. 18 hours would give the real evacuation operations time to complete their work. By the time the Devourers realized they had been tricked, millions of civilians would be safely away from the combat zones." On the bridge of the Confederate flagship Unity, War Leader Keckstone stared at the tactical displays with growing confusion. The reports he was receiving made no sense according to traditional military thinking. "These attack patterns are random," he growled to his tactical officer. "The Devourers strike at empty systems while ignoring major population centers. Their intelligence gathering is worse than useless." What Keckstone did not know was that the Devourers were attacking exactly the targets their sensors told them were most valuable. The problem was that their sensors were being fed false information by human deception systems, Fleet Mind. Psi-7 of the Mentari Collective was having similar problems. Her psychic networks could coordinate Confederate forces perfectly. But she could not understand why the Devourers seemed to ignore obvious strategic targets. "The enemy behavior does not match any known military doctrine," she reported to the Confederate command. "They appear to be making tactical errors that no competent commander would make." Ambassador Nix Prime of the Zentarians was analyzing the same data from his science vessel. His logical mind was frustrated by the apparent randomness of Devourer attacks. "There must be a pattern we are not seeing," he told his research team. "No intelligence, organic or artificial, would make such consistently poor targeting decisions." But there was a pattern, and the humans understood it perfectly. The Devourers were following their programming exactly as designed. They were attacking the highest energy signatures they could detect. The problem was that those energy signatures were artificial constructs created by human deception technology. Back on Kepler 44 to B. Colonel Su Jin-yoon received the signal she had been waiting for. The last group of civilians had reached the hidden transport ships. "All personnel begin final withdrawal," she ordered through her communication device. "Operation Phantom City is now complete." As the human forces began their own evacuation, through the tunnel system, the Devourers continued their assault on the empty buildings above. They would probably continue the attack for several more hours before their sensors confirmed that the target had been completely consumed by then. Every living being who had been on Kepler 4 for 2B would be safely aboard. Transport ships heading for Confederate core worlds. The Devourers would have spent enormous resources destroying empty buildings and holographic projections. "Captain?" Daeho Kim watched his tactical display as reports came in from across Confederate space. The pattern was becoming clear to anyone. Who knew what to look for? In systems where humans had deployed phantom fleets and false energy signatures, Devourer attacks were focused on worthless targets. In systems where conventional Confederate forces were stationed, the attacks were devastating and effective. Captain Lieutenant Soyoung Park called from her station. "We are receiving a priority communication from Admiral Lee, Admiral Taman." Lee appeared on the main screen, her expression serious but satisfied. "Captain Kim, preliminary reports suggest that Operation Labyrinth is exceeding expectations. Devourer forces are being drawn away from real population centers at a rate of approximately 70%. "What about Confederate casualties, Admiral?" Daeho asked. "Significantly lower than projected in sectors under human coordination. The other species are beginning to notice the pattern, though they have not yet understood the cause." This was both good news and a potential problem. The other Confederate species realized that human deception was responsible for the improved survival rates. They might either demand to know the details or try to stop the operation out of concerns about honor and honesty. "Orders, Admiral?" Deho asked. "Continue current operations. Expand the deception network to cover as many systems as possible. And Captain, prepare for the possibility that our allies may become suspicious of our methods." After the communication ended, Deho called his senior officers to a private meeting in his ready room. "The operation is working," he told them. "But success brings its own problems. The other species will eventually realize that human-coordinated sectors have much lower casualty rates." Engineering Chief Worm looked concerned. "Will they try to stop us?" "They might," Deho admitted. "Some of them value military honor more than they value saving lives. If they discover that we are winning through deception rather than direct combat, they may see it as shameful." Lieutenant Soyoung Park frowned. "But our methods are saving millions of lives." "Yes," Deho agreed. "But that may not matter to species that see trickery as cowardice. We need to be prepared for the possibility that our greatest challenge will not be the Devourers, but convincing our allies to let us continue protecting them." As the human flotilla continued its patrol of the empty Sigma-7 system, maintaining the illusion of a major defensive position, Deho reflected on the irony of their situation. Humanity had found a way to fight an apparently unbeatable enemy using their greatest natural advantage, the ability to understand and manipulate the psychology of other intelligent beings. They were saving more lives and achieving better results than any other Confederate force. But they were doing it through lies, deception, and misdirection. And in a galaxy where most species valued honor and direct confrontation, success achieved through trickery might be seen as worse than honorable failure. The Devourers were not the only enemy humanity would have to outwit. They would also have to convince their own allies that sometimes the most effective way to protect innocent lives was to abandon traditional ideas of how wars should be fought. The art of war, as humans had learned over thousands of years of history, was not about fighting fair. It was about winning in a way that left you and the people you cared about alive at the end. Whether the rest of the galaxy could accept that lesson remained to be seen. Intelligence Officer Minesio Chang stared at the massive holographic display in the Luna Station Command Center. The data flowing across the screen made her blood run cold. After weeks of successful deception operations, the Devourers had finally revealed their true target. "Admiral Lee," she called across the busy command center. "You need to see this immediately." Admiral Tammin Lee hurried over to Minesio's workstation. Dr. Hyanki Nam joined them, his face pale with worry. "You found?" Admiral Lee asked. Minesio highlighted a section of the display showing massive energy readings moving through space. "The Devourers have assembled their entire fleet into one group. Based on their current trajectory, they are heading directly for the Confederate core worlds." The core worlds included Nexus Prime, the capital of the Confederation, along with the home planets of 6 different species. Billions of beings lived in those systems, representing the heart of galactic civilization. "How many ships?" "Admiral," Lee asked grimly. "Over 3,000 vessels," Dr. Nam replied, studying the sensor data. "That is more firepower than all Confederate military forces combined. If they reach the core worlds, nothing will be able to stop them." Admiral Lee was quiet for several long moments, processing the implications. Finally, she looked up with a determined expression. "Assemble the senior staff for an emergency meeting," she ordered. "And get me a direct communication link to President Choi on Earth." Within an hour, the command center's main conference room was filled with humanity's top military and intelligence officers. President Jinwoo Choi appeared on the main screen, joining the meeting from his office in Seoul. "The situation is clear," Admiral Lee began. "Conventional warfare cannot stop this Devourer fleet. Every battle we have fought using traditional methods has ended in defeat. Our deception operations have been successful, but they cannot handle a force this large moving with this much determination." Captain Daeho Kim, attending by video link from his ship, raised a question. "Admiral, what if we tried to redirect them again using false energy signatures?" "The numbers are too large," Minesio answered. We would need deception operations on a scale we have never attempted. And even if we succeeded in confusing some of their ships, enough would get through to destroy the core worlds anyway. Dr. Nam leaned forward in his chair. There might be another option, but it would be extremely dangerous. Everyone in the room turned their attention to the xenopsychologist. Explain, President Choi said from the screen. Based on my analysis of devourer psychology, they prioritize targets based on energy signatures and perceived value, Dr. Nam said. What if we could convince them that the core worlds have already been evacuated and are worthless, while simultaneously making them believe that Earth contains resources more valuable than anything else in the galaxy? The room fell completely silent. Everyone understood the implications of what Dr. Nam was suggesting. Admiral Lee spoke first. You want to use Earth as bait. Not just bait, Dr. Nam corrected. The ultimate deception. You make the devourers believe that Earth contains exotic matter or energy sources worth more than entire star systems on the core worlds and come directly to our solar system instead. Captain Daeho Kim looked troubled. Doctor, that plan puts every human being at enormous risk. If the deception fails, Earth would be completely defenseless against the entire devourer fleet. But if it succeeds, President Choi said thoughtfully, we would be drawing them away from billions of innocent lives in the core worlds. Minesco studied the tactical implications. The plan would require perfect coordination between our deception networks and the Confederate military forces. We would need every available ship to follow the devourers to Earth for a coordinated ambush. An ambush that would have to work perfectly the first time, Admiral Lee added. We would not get a second chance. The debate continued for over an hour. Some officers argued that the risk to Earth was too great. Others pointed out that the alternative was the certain destruction of the core worlds and the collapse of galactic civilization. Finally, President Choi called for silence. I have listened to all the arguments, he said from the screen. This decision affects every human being alive, so it must be mine to make. The room waited as the elderly president considered the options, came into this war as the weakest species in the Confederation, President Choi said slowly. We were dismissed as irrelevant by our allies and ignored by our enemies. But we have proven that intelligence and courage can overcome superior firepower. He paused, looking directly at each person in the room through the camera. If we can save billions of lives by risking our own, then that is what we must do. It's not because we are weak, but because we are strong enough to make the hard choice. Admiral Lee nodded with respect. Orders, Mr. President. Begin Operation Final Gambit immediately. Make the devourers believe that Earth is the most valuable target in the galaxy. And prepare every human ship for the battle of our lives. Over the next 24 hours, Minacio and her team worked frantically to create the most elaborate deception in human history. They fed false information through captured communication networks, making it appear that Earth contained exotic matter research facilities and energy sources beyond anything the devourers had encountered before. Meanwhile, the core worlds implemented complete blackout protocols. All energy signatures were masked or eliminated, making the most important systems in the galaxy appear abandoned and worthless. The deception required incredible attention to detail. Every fake energy reading had to be perfectly calibrated. Every false intelligence report had to be consistent with the others. One mistake could expose the entire operation. Dr. Nam monitored Devourer communications as the false information spread through their collective consciousness. It is working, he reported. Their targeting priorities are shifting. They are beginning to show interest in the Sol system. But the plan worked too well. Within 18 hours, long-range sensors detected the entire Devourer fleet changing course toward Earth. Over 3,000 alien warships were now heading directly for humanity's homeworld. Captain Daeho Kim watched the approaching fleet from his position near Jupiter. Admiral, they took the bait completely. The entire force is coming directly at us. For a brief, terrifying moment, Admiral Lee wondered if they had made a fatal mistake. The approaching fleet had enough firepower to turn Earth into dust within minutes of arriving. But Minecio's psychological analysis had predicted this possibility. Admiral, remember that the Devourers are focused entirely on high-value targets. They will ignore everything else while they concentrate on what they believe is the ultimate prize. Including the Confederate fleet that followed them, Admiral Lee realized. The gamble was enormous, but it was working exactly as planned. War leader Keckstone of the Valorians, Fleet Mind Sisavin of the Mentari, and commanders from every other species were now positioning their forces around the Sol system. For the first time in the war, every available Confederate ship was concentrated in one location, preparing for a coordinated attack against the entire Devourer fleet. Ambassador X Prime contacted Admiral Lee directly. Admiral, our sensors show that the Devourers are completely focused on Earth. They appear to be ignoring our fleet movements entirely. That is correct, Ambassador, Admiral Lee replied. They believe Earth contains something more valuable than anything else in the galaxy. And does it? Next Prime asked. Admiral Lee looked around the command center at her officers working frantically to coordinate the coming battle. Yes, Ambassador, contains the species that figured out how to turn this war around. As the Devourer fleet entered the outer edge of the Sol system, every human knew that the next few hours would determine not just their own survival, but the fate of galactic civilization. The perfect lie had drawn the enemy exactly where humanity wanted them. Now they had to prove that Earth's defenders were strong enough to finish what their deception had started. President Choi appeared on screens throughout the human fleet and on Earth itself. Citizens of Earth and defenders of humanity, he said, calmly, today we face our greatest test. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the most advanced. But we are the species that learned how to turn weakness into strength and fear into courage. He paused, looking directly into the camera. The enemy comes to Earth believing they will find treasure beyond imagination. They are right. They will find the treasure of human determination, human ingenuity, and human refusal to surrender when innocent lives are at stake. As the President's words echoed across human space, the Devourer fleet moved deeper into the Sol system, completely unaware that they were flying into the largest military trap in galactic history. The perfect lie was about to become the perfect ambush. Captain Daeho Kim watched through his ship's viewing screen as 3,000 Devourer vessels entered the Sol system. The enemy fleet was massive beyond anything he had ever imagined. Each ship was larger than his own vessel, and their combined firepower could destroy entire worlds. The Devourers moved in perfect formation toward Earth. Their sensors locked onto the false energy signatures that made humanity's homeworld appear to contain the galaxy's greatest treasures. They had the idea that behind them, hidden among the asteroids and moons, the largest fleet in Confederate history was waiting. All human ships, this is Admiral Lee, came the voice over the communication system. Begin final preparations for Operation Final Gambit. Remember, timing is everything. On Luna Station, Admiral Taemin Lee stood in the command center surrounded by displays showing the positions of over 2,000 Confederate vessels. War leader Keckstone's Valorian fleet was hidden behind Jupiter. Fleet Mind Sisavan's Mentari ships waited near Saturn. Every species that had once dismissed humanity as weak was now following human battle plans. Status report, Admiral Lee called to her officers. Intelligence Officer Manesio Chang checked her displays. All deception systems are active. The Devourers are completely focused on Earth. Their formation is tight and vulnerable. Dr. Hayanki Nam monitored the enemy communications. Their collective consciousness is sharing information about the valuable target ahead. They are not scanning for threats from other directions. This was exactly what the humans had planned. Devourer's programming made them concentrate entirely on high-value targets while ignoring everything else. It was their greatest strength. And their greatest weakness? Admiral Lee opened a communication channel to all Confederate forces. All ships, maintain positions until my signal. The enemy must be completely committed before we spring the trap. On Earth, President Jin Woo-choi watched the approaching fleet from his office window. The ships were still too far away to see, but sensors showed them getting closer every minute. Soon they would be close enough to realize that Earth's energy signatures were false. Mr. President, said his aide nervously. Perhaps you should? Move to the underground bunkers. President Choi shook his head. If this plan fails, no bunker will save us. If it succeeds, I want to be here to see it happen. The Devourer fleet reached the orbit of Mars and continued toward Earth. Their sensors were so focused on the planet ahead that they missed the massive Confederate force surrounding them. Captain Dae-ho Kim opened a communication channel to all frequencies, including those monitored by the Devourers. What he was about to do went against everything he believed about honor and courage, but it was necessary to complete the deception. "Attention Devourer fleet," he broadcast, making his voice sound defeated and afraid. "This is Captain Kim of the Human Defense Force. We surrender unconditionally to your superior power." The transmission was heard by every ship in both fleets. Many Confederate officers were shocked to hear a human captain apparently giving up without a fight. But Admiral Lee smiled. This was the final layer of their deception. "We offer to serve as guides to other inhabited worlds," Dae-ho continued. "We will provide you with the locations of all valuable targets in exchange for sparing Earth's population." War Leader Kexton's voice came over the Confederate communication channel. "What is that human doing? Has he lost his mind?" "Trust the plan," Admiral Lee replied calmly. "Everything is proceeding as expected." Devourers received Dae-ho's surrender message and processed it through their collective consciousness. Their programming interpreted the offer as confirmation that Earth contained extremely valuable resources worth protecting through betrayal of allies. More importantly, the surrender message made them lower their defensive systems slightly. Why maintain full defenses against an enemy that had already given up? Dr. Nam watched the enemy fleet's energy patterns change. "Admiral, their shield strength has decreased by 15%. They are reducing defensive power to increase sensor strength for better target analysis." "Perfect," Admiral Lee said.
Ow.
"All ships, prepare for simultaneous activation of hidden weapon systems." What the Devourers did not know was that Earth's defenseless appearance was the ultimate deception. Over the past months, every major city, industrial center, and orbital station had been secretly converted into a weapon platform. Factories had been turned into missile launchers. Communication towers had become energy cannons. Even civilian apartment buildings contained hidden defense systems. The planet that appeared helpless was actually the most heavily armed world in galactic history. "Devourer fleet has reached optimal position," Menesio reported. "They're completely surrounded and focused on Earth." Admiral Lee took a deep breath. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. "All Confederate forces," she announced, "activate all systems simultaneously. Operation Final Gambit is now active." What happened next became known as the Battle of Seoul, the largest military engagement in galactic history. Every Confederate ship revealed itself at the same instant. Valorian battleships emerged from behind Jupiter, their weapons charging. Mentari vessels appeared near Saturn, coordinating through their psychic networks. Zentarian science ships dropped their cloaking fields and began targeting enemy weak points at the same time. Earth itself transformed from a helpless target into a fortress world. Thousands of hidden weapon platforms activated across the planet's surface. Orbital stations revealed themselves to be military installations. The moon opened launch bays that had been disguised as mining operations. The Devourers found themselves trapped in the center of a sphere of firepower. From every direction, their collective consciousness tried to process the sudden change in situation. But human deception had confused their target prioritization systems. "All weapons, fire," Admiral Lee commanded. The space around Earth erupted in the light of thousands of energy beams and missile launches. The Devourers fought back with desperate fury, but they were caught completely unprepared for a battle of this scale. Captain Dae-ho Kim's ship joined the attack, its weapons targeting the enemy command vessels. "Is for everyone who called. Humans weak," he said quietly as his shots found their targets. The battle raged for hours. Devourer ships were destroyed by the hundreds, but they fought with mechanical determination. Some tried to escape, but found their navigation systems compromised by false star charts that human intelligence had planted in their databases during the surrender deception. War Leader Kexton's voice came over the communication channels, filled with amazement. "These humans fight like warriors born for battle. Their planet is a fortress that rivals anything in Valorian history. Fleetmind Sci-Fi added her thoughts to the shared communication. The tactical coordination is perfect. Every shot is calculated for maximum effect. This is not the work of a weak species. As the battle continued, it became clear that the Devourers were losing. Cut off from escape routes and surrounded by superior numbers, their fleet was being systematically destroyed. The final Devourer ship was destroyed, just as Earth's sun was rising over Asia. President Choi watched the debris field through his office window, thinking about all the lives that had been saved. Admiral Lee appeared on his communication screen. Mr. President, the Sol system is secure. All Devourer forces have been eliminated. Casualties? President Choi asked. Surprisingly light. The element of surprise was complete. Most Confederate ships survived the battle. 3 days later, President Choi stood before the Confederate Assembly on Nexus Prime. The chamber was filled with representatives from every member species, all of them looking at humanity with new respect. Fellow beings, President Choi began 3 months ago. Many of you questioned what humans could contribute to this alliance. You saw us as the weakest link in the Confederate chain. He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that had once shown dismissal and now showed admiration. We never claimed to be the strongest species or the fastest, never boasted of superior technology or unbeatable warriors. But we've studied every form of competition and conflict in our history, and we learned one simple truth. The chamber was completely silent. Intelligence can triumph over strength. Understanding can defeat superior numbers. And sometimes, the most effective way to protect innocent lives is to think differently than your enemies expect. Ambassador Nexbrim stood from his seat. President Choi, the Confederate Assembly formally recognizes humanity's elevation to senior membership status. Your species has proven that wisdom and courage are as valuable as any weapon. After the ceremony, President Choi met privately with several alien leaders. War leader Keckstone approached him with obvious respect. President Choi, I must ask, when your captain offered to surrender and guide us to other worlds, was that part of your strategy from the beginning? President Choi smiled the same smile that Captain Deho had shown to Commander Velthak months earlier. War leader? Does it matter now? Keckstone laughed, understanding that he would never get a direct answer.
Oh, your species is more dangerous
than any of us realized. Not because you are strong, but because we can never be certain what is truth and what is carefully planned deception. Perhaps President Choi replied, that uncertainty will help maintain peace in the galaxy.